Great, so welcome to Performance and Overview Scrutiny Committee meeting at Tuesday the 10th of February, and welcome to everyone who's in the chamber and all of our colleagues who are online. And we have a number of additional colleagues who have joined us from other committees, and we welcome you to this meeting. We invited you to join as we're covering particularly financial matters today, which have obviously got ramifications across many more parts of the council than only performance and overview. And for all those residents and businesses who may be watching online or right now or in the future, welcome. It's really good to have you joining us too. We're going to be getting to the reports in just a minute, but first of all, Robert, any apologies for absence?
Yes, Chair. We've got Councillor Jill Bond and Councillor Sue McConnell is substituting, and also Claire Werrett as well from this committee.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Councillor McConnell, for substituting for Councillor Bond. And number two, do we have any declarations of interest? I see none. So we'll move on to any items on 3 from Public Open Forum, Robert?
No one today, Chair.
And so we move on to the first of the 2 main reports in front of us, which is the financial update at item 4 to scrutinise the budgetary position, both revenue and capital, for services falling within our remit as a committee. And there are some 4 attached detailed papers supporting that. So I'm going to hand across to welcome to the Cabinet Member Ben Callard. Good to see you here, Councillor Callard. Thank you for joining us. And the Senior Finance team with us this morning as well. So I'm going to pass across to Councillor Callard to introduce that particular report, and we'll then later move into questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. This report that I bring today provides the Performance and Overview Scrutiny Committee with a 3rd financial update on the Council's revenue and capital budget for the 2025-2026 financial year. It sets out the latest forecast position, explains the key movements since the previous update, and highlights the financial pressures, risks and structural issues that will shape both the year-end outturn and the Council's financial position as it moves into the 2026-2027 financial year. At this stage, the forecast revenue position is an underspend of £1.146 million, which is equivalent to about 0.5% of the Council's budget. This represents a significant improvement compared to earlier forecasts and reflects a combination of factors, including the effective use of external grant funding within social care, favourable movements in debt financing arising from higher cash balances and capital slippage, and a stronger than anticipated performance in a number of income-generating services. However, this improved headline position is unevenly distributed across services and sits alongside continued volatility and cost pressures in a number of demand-led areas, most notably social care, housing and homelessness, additional learning needs and education. The report highlights that, subject to the outturn position being realised, £850,000 of the forecast underspend will be required to be transferred to reserves in order to maintain the Council's general balances at or above 5% of the proposed net revenue budget for 2026-2027. This reinforces the constrained nature of the Council's financial flexibility, with limited scope for in-year underspends to be redeployed, and underlines the importance of protecting financial resilience in the face of ongoing and emerging risks. Detailed service commentary within the report illustrates the contrasting financial positions across directorates. While adult social care shows a markedly improved forecast, driven in part by in-year grant allocations and operational efficiencies, underlying demand pressures continue to grow, particularly in relation to residential care and complex need. At the same time, children's services, housing and homelessness, and ALN provision continue to experience significant financial pressure, reflecting both rising demand and the high unit costs associated with statutory provision. The report also sets out progress against the £10.7 million of savings built into the 2025-2026 budget, with over 93% forecast to be delivered. While this represents an improvement on recent years, the remaining shortfall highlights the increasing difficulty of delivering savings at scale in a challenging operating environment. Alongside this, the projected increase in the cumulative schools reserves deficit to £7.5 million represents a growing call on the Council's balance sheet and a material risk to its overall financial resilience. In addition, the update reflects the continuing impact of external factors beyond the Council's direct control, including higher than assumed inflation, pressures on debt recovery and income collection, shortfalls in funding for increased employers' national insurance contributions, and the financial consequences of Storm Claudia across both revenue and capital budgets. While some of these pressures have been mitigated through in-year funding and favourable financing movements, others are likely to persist and will need to be managed as part of the Council's medium-term financial planning. Overall, this update presents a financial position that has improved in headline terms, but remains underpinned by significant structural and demand-led pressures. The issues set out in this report are central to understanding the Council's capacity to maintain reserves at a prudent level, manage risk within a highly constrained funding environment, and sustain services in the context of increasing demand and ongoing financial uncertainty. And I look forward to the questions of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Callard. And I don't know, Jonathan or Peter, did you want to add to those introductory remarks before we open for questions?
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Callard's covered that quite well, so happy to go to questions. Chair, thank you.
Thank you. So opening the report to questions, and who has their hand up? Or who's going to be first to hold their hand up? I see Marion with Councillor Howells with your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Ben, for that introduction. Thank you. So on the school's financial position, what is the timetable for the recovery plans for the three largest deficit schools, and how will the progress be monitored? Then on children's services, are there any opportunities to reduce the reliance on external legal spend, or is this largely unavoidable? Is there a link between the reduction in the Welsh government, £332,000 reduction from Welsh government on that? And finally, on housing, what is the recovery plan, and when is the service expected to return to budget?
Thanks, Councillor Howells. And just for residents who will be interested, the reference you're making to schools recovering from a deficit position, the year-end forecast is, I think, £7.5 million deficit. So I think that's what you're referring to in terms of that. A worsting of 456,000 over the year. Yeah, and on the third question, you're asking about housing services, which are in the report forecasting a £500,000 overspend. So just to put a scale on to those. So Jonathan, did you want to pick up on those? Who wants to go first? Yeah, Councillor Callard.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the question, Councillor Howells. I'll just pick up the schools question first, if that's okay. We've been working with the schools. I think you're right, actually, to identify that most of the deficit is with just a very small number of schools. So it's those that we've been really keen to work with in order to try and bring them back into balance. And as with all of these things, it's difficult because even if you get to a balanced position, there's still the deficit to handle. So in essence, you need a sustained period of time within a surplus in order to get back to recover the deficit. We've met with all of the schools involved. The length of time which we're looking for a recovery is about 8 to 10 years. It's an extended period of time, and it's an extended period of time for a reason, because what we don't want to do is to force these schools to make really drastic changes really quickly, which will have a bigger impact on the school's population. So we're looking for, I guess, incremental change over a long period of time to turn that, to firstly turn the deficit into a balance or a slight surplus. And then actually, if we can maintain that slight surplus over an extended period of time, those school deficits will come down. And I think that's probably the most sustainable and responsible way to tackle them. And on that side, we've, as you know, recently come out of an Estin inspection, and we got really positive results. So I think it's one of these areas which we're really aware of the risk. The schools themselves are aware of the risk. We want to work with them to bring it down. We're working together, but it's a case of being responsible, doing things at the correct pace, in order that we can maintain the quality of our education service. On children's legal fees, I'll hand over. John, did you want to take that?
Yeah. Thanks, Councillor. So we've had some specific complex cases this year where we've had to employ some additional external expertise. We believe that those will be one-off in nature. So whilst we've experienced quite a significant increase this year in those fees, we won't be having to bring all of that into our estimations for next financial year. Although we do believe there is going to remain some pressure on that area. When we talk about complex cases here, these are things where we're having to engage external barristers. It's not capacity that we will have in-house to deal with some of this. Those skills are going to be needed from the external market, and they always will be, because the volatility, as you can imagine, within some of this means that that's more cost effective for us to bring it in as needed. So yes, we'll be bringing in some additional cost into next year's budget, and that's within the draft proposals that are on the agenda today.
Sorry, John. And there was a reduction in the Welsh Government family support grant. Was that having an effect on it as well, or not really? It was a £332,000 reduction on that.
So I'm not sure if we're overlapping with next year's proposals, or is this something that's noted
it's in 4.13 of this report.
Okay. Chair, I think Jane Rogers is happy to go in on that one. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Jane Rogers, Director for Social Care, Safeguarding and Health. So in relation to the connection between the two, no. The deficit in the grant around family support isn't connected to the overspend in legal services. As John Davis explained, there were two particular cases this year that did cause high expenditure, and it is quite a volatile cohort of children who sometimes the expenses in court are higher than we would wish, and are unavoidable through the use of barristers, etc. But the deficit in the grant around the family support isn't connected to that.
Councillor Howells, are you content with?
Yeah, I think there's one more question from there. Sorry.
Housing recovery, I think you're.
That's it.
So the £500,000 additional expenditure above plan on housing. Who wants to take that?
I'm happy to take that.
Thank you, Jane.
So it's the slightly complicated situation with housing is that it is a budget in transition. So if members will recall that the budget has transferred over to social care, but that's just a bit of context in a way. So one of the reasons why there's been the overspend is that we haven't made the expected savings against the full year effect of opening of Severn View, because it didn't come online as early as we had originally anticipated. So that's one of the reasons. Other reasons are around costs incurred for reparation around handovers. So when tenants leave one property to take up residence elsewhere, we've incurred some high costs associated with making good the properties ready for the landlord to take back or the next tenants to move in. So that's contributed to the overspend as well. So there's some steps that we can take. Certainly, Seven View is fully operational now, so that should see some costs being recuperated through its full use. And we're working to look at the sort of processes around handbacks and how much we need to build in to our forecasted expenditure around the costs that incurs. I have got Tyrone Stokes, the financial manager for the director, online, who is happy to jump in just to add a little more detail.
Thank you, and welcome, Tyrone, if you're able to join us.
Good morning, and thanks for that, Jane. In terms of housing, it is a recent addition into the Social Care and Health Directorate. To elaborate on what Jane mentioned, one element is the delayed opening of Seven View. That's the former care home that we had in social care. It's been taken over by housing. Next year, it would hope that it would make full of the savings, but it didn't take occupancy until late July, beginning of August. Also, taking over an older building, there's been other associated costs as well that only came to fruition once we moved in terms of housing. The other impact as well has been when we've been handing over bed and breakfast or housing facilities, is the amount of funds that we've had to put in to make good any repairs or damages left behind by former tenants. That's added to the overspend as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for helping to explain that. Just to try and unpack a couple of the things that we've just heard. So, understanding this, what is such an important issue for so many people, the forecast for £7.5 million in schools deficits. It does strike me that it's not only the secondaries. 6 of the schools that are identified in the report are identified as being in the highest risk by ourselves in terms of their state of finances, and they are primaries. So, I do think it's important that we don't exclusively focus this on secondaries. What I understood was that there would be plans for 8 years of turning around those deficits. Does that mean that presumably the council is financing that deficit for those 8 years? And where is that shown in our financial reporting? And as much as we can all, I'm sure, understand why there's no desire to make any more rapid changes, how do we manage the fact that right now those costs continue to increase? So between last report and this report, they've increased again the deficit by about another £500,000. So they appear still to be on a rising trend, and kicking it into the long grass. 8 years is a very, very long horizon. So do we continue to finance that? Are they all given 8 years? There are a lot of questions that come out of that. I wonder if you could clarify some of that. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. It is, as I said, a really interesting topic, this, and one that's really very important. We've given the comprehensive schools an extended period of time, as I mentioned, to I guess have a stable transition onto a more solid financial footing. We know that some of the changes that the schools have to implement in order to get to balance and into surplus, they take a little bit of time. So we've expected the situation to deteriorate slightly before it starts to improve. It does sit on our balance sheets as a negative, and I suppose it's reasonable to say that in not having those balances available to us, we do forego income on those balances. I would say that's the cost associated with the schools being in deficit balance. I met with the school budget forum earlier this month or late last month, to talk it through. We know how important it is that schools set responsible, financial trajectories, and we're going to continue to press that message with them and to work with them in order to get them back into balance. You mentioned about some of the primary schools there being higher risk. That's mainly due to the trajectory of those schools' balances, but the reason I mentioned about focusing on the comprehensives is really if we can take those really big balances on, the big deficits, then really that's the quickest way to improve the overall situation of the school's deficit balances.
Yeah, I appreciate that it's challenging, and there's no getting away from that. I think residents would probably want to understand, as with the schools, what are the steps, the specific steps that are required to bring the reserves deficit down. Are there any particular steps that you could explain?
I think it's worth repeating that the responsibility for schools' budgets falls onto the governing body of those schools. It's their responsibility to make sure that their schools are on the sound financial footing. We've approached it two ways. We know that about 85 to 90% of the cost of running a school is in staff costs. Now, some of our schools have got, are at a particular point in time where they may be undergoing a transition, where they need to realise some of those staff costs in order to restructure themselves, which we're supporting them with. And from the other side, as we'll see, I guess, as we come into the budget, which is the next agenda item, we are trying to, from the council side, increase the funding which we put into our schools in order that we can tackle it from both sides. I think it's an issue that really, as an authority, we need to play our part in it, and the schools' governing bodies also need to play their part in it. But yeah, I mean, most of the costs within our schools are borne by staff, which is why we're keen that any reduction in those staff costs, any associated reduction in staffing within our schools is done very sensitively and at a controlled pace, so that it really has a minimal impact on those schools.
Thank you. And I don't know, Will McLean, the director, I don't know whether you wanted to come in on this particular issue.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning. Will McLean. I'm the Strategic Director for Children, Learning Skills and the Economy. I think, first of all, I think committee's right to flag the importance of the school's deficit position and the fact that as a directorate working with our head teachers, we've recognised that, it is a significant risk, both for the directorate, but also more importantly for the local authority itself. I think what we've been looking at on an individual school basis is what is driving the deficit position. There is a range of things in that area, some related to additional costs associated with children with additional learning needs, but that is one of a number of drivers. But there are also things like the cost of supply. We're seeing increased levels of absence in school. Supply is expensive, and that has been driven. And also sometimes HR practices are not as tight as they might be. And we're having those conversations around making sure that staff are returning to work as quickly as they can after periods of being unwell and so on, to minimise their absence from school, but also to minimise the consequential supply costs that sit alongside that. So for those schools which you've rightly identified, Chair, in terms of being primary schools, which are presenting as a significant risk, there's a kind of tripartite meeting in the first instance that involves finance colleagues, but also school improvement colleagues and colleagues from the inclusion service to really look at how the school is structuring itself, where its costs are and what's driving those costs. We're also joined by colleagues from HR there, so we can really work with the school and school leaders to understand where they are, but really importantly, put in early steps to address those expenditure positions, because that's the key point. Because of the way in which the school year falls in comparison to the financial year, the earlier you can make your decisions around savings has a significant impact on the impact in the coming year. So we are addressing that. I think colleagues are right to identify the fact that I think 75% sits in those three institutions. We've been working with two of those for a significant period of time, and we really expect to see changes in terms of their performance, but it's making sure that we're acting quickly to make sure that those primary schools positions are arrested now and they continue to improve their positions.
Thank you, Will. And it's such an important area. We've all got a huge stake in our schools continue to do such a great job that they do and providing for all our learners. So thank you for the question, Councillor Howells, on that. I'm going to move on to Councillor Buckler.
Thank you, Chair. I have several concerns about the position we as a council find ourselves in. The headline surplus of 1.1 million sounds good, but it seems to be largely driven by grants, financing movements and vacancies rather than genuine structural control. We've talked about schools and the overspends on schools, which is, as you know, you flagged up, is very important. And underspends seem to be driven by vacancies and the grants. So is the position more cosmetic than structural? So, how are we going to address that? Going back to education, the additional learning needs, there's a rising spend on this. We have a 462,000 overspend, and it's rising, and we're relying on external providers. We know these are legally unavoidable costs, but the trend is upwards. And it's a structural pressure likely to grow. How are we going to deal with that? Capital slippage in delivery of projects seems to be growing. So are we just, as the chair has intimated before, kicking the can down the road? Projects aren't being delivered and benefits are delayed. So, is that timing rather than performance? Sort of lastly, really, what worries me is our apparent surplus is largely driven by vacancies, grants and timing, where meanwhile schools' additional learning needs and housing pressures are worsening. Is that as a structurally sustainable budget? Is this tomorrow's problem just being pushed forward? I know harsh things, but obviously it's all very important for our residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buckler. And if I may just put a little bit of flesh on the bones of your question around the surplus and reference to grants. So you referenced the underspend, which I think all of us welcome. It's really good to see that the overall position that we were in the previous quarter has improved now to an underspend of £1.1 million. So we recognise that, and I think we're all a lot happier, to see that happening. However, your question is, how did we get there? And just to put some flesh on the bones of that, there was a one-off grant fund of £600,000. There was a further Pathways of Care grant of £914,000. And the other matter of substance you referred to is 500,000, which was in changes to debt financing. And so if you put those three, what I'll call one-offs until we hear that they're not, together, that's £2 million that has come in, which has corrected our forecast overspend. And we're now forecasting an underspend of 1.1, having received that 2 million. And against that, your point, as in 4.29 in the report, shows a shortfall in the savings targets. of £740,000. So I guess that puts some flesh on the bones. I hope you don't mind me adding a bit of detail to that for any resident looking at that. So your questions are very pertinent, but just with those points in mind. So who wants to start? The first point about surplus. Councillor Callard?
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Buckler, for the question. We, as you know, rely significantly on grant funding in order to support our services. It's always welcome to get grant funding in. I suppose I would be more concerned if this grant funding managed to get us to net out the budget rather than get to an underspend. It's very welcome, but I think we'd still be in a reasonably strong financial position without it. When we, we touched there on the savings and actually on a lot of the pressure within health and social care. I think it's worth, as well as we reflect on the 2025-2026 budget, we know, and I'm happy to say the same for 26-27, we know that when we enter our financial year, the budget we set at that time is the best guess about demand on our services and how we're going to spend our money. It inevitably changes throughout the year. We report those variances to this committee, and you'll know from your experience on this committee, Councillor Buckler, that nothing is ever, we never end up with all zeros at the bottom of our spreadsheets at the end of the day. So we expect these fluctuations. The grants we receive to support our services are really crucial to delivering a lot of these services. I don't really have a lot to add. You mentioned about the savings, and I know the Chair mentioned about the savings in terms of us under-delivering by, £700,000, £740,000. I think what that number doesn't tell is that we've actually delivered over £9 million worth of savings in the financial year. And while we continue to see pressure in health and social care, that's where we've spent most of our energy in actually trying to improve the services, make the services more efficient, to provide care in a slightly different way. And we've seen through previous years that actually the work that's been done there has really started to deliver in terms of putting that service on a more sustainable footing. I think overall, although we continue to see challenges within health and social care, I think it's actually a very positive position where we've got to, considering the demand and the complexity of demand that the council faces. It's not a situation that's unique to Monmouthshire. We know this is a pressure across all local authorities, but we've been working very hard over the previous years in order to be in this position that we're in now. And, whereas it would always be nice to realise 100% of the proposed savings, I think 93% is actually pretty good going, considering the environment in which we operate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Callard. The question about capital slippage, is that something that you could address, please, Jonathan?
Thank you, Chair. So I think it's it's always a very valid point to raise in terms of the progress that has been made across our capital schemes. We do have just over £20 million of slippage against a programme that was around about 70 million. So it's a considerable proportion of the overall programme. I think when you read through the list of that slippage and some of the reasons sitting behind it, it's very much around schemes that need additional expertise externally, or where there's additional factors that and hurdles that need to be overcome to make progress. So, one of the best examples there is probably the capital city region investment, and the delays in the wider region of 10 local authorities making progress on their capital investments. Now, it's very difficult for us to directly impact that progress. Whilst we have a part of it, we are reliant on the wider region progressing that. So a lot of what you're seeing in terms of that 20 million is outside of the direct control of the authority, and where perhaps we're waiting for surveys to progress, consultations to finish. So I think the pushback then comes in terms of, were we realistic around our timing of some of this investment? And I think the answer is probably no in some cases. I think there's a valid question and pushback to budget holders there of perhaps being overly optimistic given the factors that come in to getting a capital scheme delivered. So we're continually trying to refine that and have that honest conversation with budget holders prior to setting a budget. But naturally, when we look across some of these schemes, they're multi-million, multi-year schemes, and it doesn't take a lot, whether that's inclement weather, availability of external expertise to change the timing of some of that spend. So it's something we're continually looking to improve on in terms of that timing. I think impact-wise, around half of that 20 million is financed by borrowing. So there's both positives and negatives to that. It means we don't have to borrow as early as we otherwise would. But obviously we would like to see these schemes being delivered on time, providing the benefits that they are meant to deliver. So it's something we need to keep a careful eye on as we move into the next financial year.
Thank you, Jonathan. Just for clarity, so the capital expenditure for the year is forecast to be, I think, 50.8 million. So 21 million is clearly a big chunk of that, is about 40%. Is it more and significantly more, or is it about the same or less than we've seen in slippage in previous years? I guess we've got no real handle on that. There's always slippage, as you've pointed out, but is it very much in line with previous years, or has something else happened?
I think it's a very difficult question to answer because whilst we've got a core capital program of probably around 10 to 12 million that is recurrent year on year, a lot of our other schemes are bespoke one-off. So the progress on those will be variable depending on what those schemes are looking to deliver. So I think if I look at our core program, progress is usually very good on that in terms of delivery and timescales. It's where we have the more bespoke programs of work in terms of our new school, for example, or active travel works, that it perhaps becomes quite more variable in terms of how that progress can continue. So very hard to make a comparison year on year with that level of slippage, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. Councillor Buckler, did you want to? Were you happy with those responses? Anything you wanted to follow up on?
I'd just like to really make a comment, and thank you, Jonathan and Councillor Callard, for delving into this. But it's all, it is very important, as we keep saying. We are at a very vulnerable moment. In 3 months' time, the political landscape in Wales could well shift greatly. So really, I suppose, by asking these questions, I'm flagging up that we have to be ever vigilant and more conscious of what can be around the corner for us. So it's really flagging up how important it is that that you're all on the case and considering the future. But thank you for that.
I'm looking at nods here saying they are on the case. So yeah, it's a great point. With an uncertain future, can we rely on one-off grants into the future, and to what extent that could have an impact on us? I guess we will not know until we get into that future. But It's obviously a concern, but thank you for the questions. I'm looking at Councillor Strong.
Thank you, Chair. The Chair referred briefly earlier to improvements in debt financing budget, and that's commented on in a couple of places in the report. Could we have a bit of commentary on how that works, how that gain was achieved, and whether it's the sort of thing perhaps we can look to in the future of repeating at some level? If I can ask for that as my first point, please. Secondly, there's a reference in 3.8 to the decline in debt recovery rates, including in social care. But then in 4.11, it seems to be saying that the recovery rates remain stable. Is that a bit of a contradiction there, which would be the most accurate way of characterising that? So that's 3.8 and 4.11. And then finally, a pleasing reference to improved performance from our leisure centres with higher membership and so on. I appreciate the figures won't be available today, I would think, but could we have a breakdown to the different leisure centres? I'm particularly concerned that there have been comments made about the problems with Caldecott Leisure Centre, some of which perhaps have been exaggerated, although it's generally recognised that it is in need of refurbishment. I think councillors would like to see whether there's been an impact, given that the other leisure centres have had quite significantly higher levels of investment than Caldecott. And what impact has that had upon membership by being able to compare those things a bit? But as I say, I appreciate that those figures won't be available today, but we'd like to see them in the future if we can, please. Thank you.
And thank you, Councillor Strong. And well, I know Robert's making a note of that. We'll make sure that we get hold of those numbers, not just for Caldecott, but for the other leisure centres, so we can see what the impact is. So thank you for raising that. So debt financing and possibly explaining that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. So as you can imagine, Councillor, quite a complex area to forecast at the beginning of any one year, and I think to come within a couple of 100,000 of this as a forecast is probably testament to the accuracy of that forecast when you consider that we're talking about round about a £9 to £10 million budget for debt financing overall. We were naturally expecting and using data and forecasts that were available, either through the Office for Budget Responsibility or more local economic factors when putting together that forecast. But as we know, things change and can change quickly, and we've seen inflation prove to be a little bit sticky and remain above the 2% target that the UK government have set themselves. And similarly, interest rates, when you sit alongside inflation, haven't moved as we originally expected back when we set the budget. So all of that has an impact. I explained earlier about capital slippage and how some of that was funded from borrowing. That will also have an impact. So we were naturally planning to borrow for that capital investment, and we now won't. So we don't have to take those loans. So that has had an impact as well, and means that we don't have to bear those interest costs on those loans. Similarly, we also have surplus cash day to day that we invest across a multitude of investments, and particularly those that are invested in non-cash have performed or outperformed what we expected, and we've seen significant recovery, if you'll be well aware, throughout the year across property markets, stocks and shares markets, bonds. So our investments in those areas have outperformed where we expected to be, and has all contributed to that outperformance that we're seeing. In terms of whether that's a one-off, that's the ultimate question. We're continuing to look at our estimates for next financial year, again, based on the best data we have available at the current time. And by the time that we come to set a budget at council in March, that may well have changed again. But we do expect some further pressure overall, because our capital programme grows through borrowing and we have more costs. So you get natural growth in that debt financing. But we have all of those other factors then to overlay in terms of rates, slippage. So we will have more cost next year, but we'll monitor that again before we set a final budget in March.
Jonathan, it's a very good, clear explanation. Can I just ask for the clarity around the terminology we use? Because residents, they hear about borrowing, they hear about debt, and is it the same thing? So the financing, the debt financing that you're describing is about the cost of borrowing, whereas what you've also talked about is the gain through investment from surplus cash. But they're shown separately, are they, in the budget?
They are shown separately, but I think when we talk to overall debt financing, we take the consolidated position. So that includes both the interest we have to pay on our loans, the repayments we have to set aside for the principal on those loans, but netted off by the amount of investment income we can achieve on day-to-day surplus cash balances. So that is all taken as a consolidated amount.
So we're moving on to debt recovery rates. Unless, Councillor Strong, you wanted to follow up on that particular point?
Just quickly, would it be fair to say then from your answer that the fact that we've come out in a better position than we estimated, it just is a reflection of a sensibly cautious approach by the council?
We will always be sensibly cautious. It's the first. It's the first fundamental principle of Treasury management. So we will always look to achieve stability and security of our funds. That's first and foremost before we look for returns. That's always served us well, and it's one of the overriding principles of the Prudential Code that we have to adhere to.
It's good to know that our senior finance officers are not wildly adventurous. I think there would be cause for concern were that to be the case, but sensibly cautious is reassuring.
Well, some councils have been, of course, in the past.
Let's not go there. But good. So moving on to Councillor Strong's question about debt recovery rates and the consistency in which they're reported in their report.
Thanks, Chair. I'm happy to pick that up. The question around the social care debt position. I mean, it's fair to say that the debt position over the recent years has seen a steady increase in the amount of debt that we carry. And I think the reference to it stabilising was a sort of a point in time where it hadn't increased for a quarter, which, it is positive, but I think the underlying trend it is towards an increased debt position. Some of the context for that, some of the debt that we carry is known about and is secured, and it's a matter of waiting for that debt to be recovered. It might be on a deferred payment around a particular property. There may be matters progressing through the Court of Protection to establish legal power of attorney, etc., to sort out finances. And I think that the increase in debt correlates with the rise in residents that are in care home facilities. When residents move into care home, there's no cap on the payment. The payment that the charges for care are much higher than non-residential care charges, and the debt, if it's not able to be paid at the time, or if there are issues around legal power of attorney, so the person in care not having the capacity to make the decisions around their financial affairs, the debt will quickly build up. As I said, a lot of that is secured. There is a small proportion of debt that isn't secured, and that's where we look to sort of take action around sort of proactive action around entering into maybe a legal process or really pursuing that debt. We receive regular updates through Tyrone Stokes into our DMT, into our Directorate Management team, so that we can track. We've put in considerable work vis-a-vis the workforce to try and ensure that people are making sure that as far as we possibly can, financial arrangements are established and heading in the direction right from the beginning, especially when somebody is being assessed for potentially entering into a care home. So yes, it is something that we're very aware of. We track closely. It's associated with the rise of people heading in towards residential care or having entered into residential care. And the underlying trend is upwards, but hopefully through some of the actions that we're taking, we can start to mitigate the level of unsecured debt that we have.
And the third question is on leisure centres, and it may be that that's something that we'll need to dig out as information, but I didn't know if there was anything that any colleague wanted to mention around that. It's always encouraging to see greater uptake, I suppose, is the overall point. Sorry, Craig.
Thank you, Councillor Neil. Craig O'Connor, Chief Officer for Place and Community Wellbeing. Just a bit of a context around that in terms of leisure centre uptakes and memberships. We've seen significant increases since 22-23 in terms of all of our leisure centres. One of the areas which we're focusing on is the Caldecott Leisure Centre in terms of the investments have been placed into Monmouth, Abergavenny, at Chepstow. I'm still working and exploring how we can improve the Caldecott offering in terms of equipment and the building maintenance, but it has seen increased memberships since 2022-23. So we had 872 in 23, and now we've currently got 2,000 gym memberships. So there is that increase. We're still working on in terms of how we can improve that one. So ultimately, that is the focus for us strategically over the next sort of 12 months.
Thank you. You probably entered the meeting after we began the discussion, and it was just to say actually getting the numbers for each of the leisure centres in terms of usage, membership would be really helpful to be able to just understand how that's moving. We'll follow that up after the meeting. Thank you. And Councillor Strong, was there anything you wanted to add or follow up on?
Just very quickly, thanks to Jane for that reply. It's really a question of timescales, isn't it? Looking at the long-term trend as opposed to a single quarter, which might be different from the long-term trend. And yeah, just on the leisure centres, I'm not implying that there isn't investment in Caldecott. As we speak, they're working on a new all-weather football pitch, and I gather there's also improvements relating to GP referrals and that sort of thing. So but having the figures will be very useful for us to be able to respond to points made by residents.
That's really good to hear. In terms of it, it's greater use. So yeah, we'll follow through with that, and I'm going to move on. Thank you for the questions. We'll move on to Councillor Pavia.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, just in terms of passenger transport, the papers.
Councillor Pavia, you're coming across, but it's very, very faint. That's much better.
Is that
that's
better?
much better? Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Apologies, Chair. Just in terms of passenger transport, the papers show the distance eligibility saving in the passenger transport can't be fully delivered because of updated pupil numbers and safe routes, meaning statutory transport must continue, which has contributed to a 138k overspend and obviously consequential saving shortfall. Just wondering what alternative savings or service redesign options are being examined in year to replace what is now structurally unachievable efficiencies, or are we just looking at new options for the next financial year? In terms of capital, I'm just thinking particularly the damage the county has received in relation to Storm Claudia, and we've seen both revenue and capital pressures there. Early capital damage estimations of 9 million, potentially 3.5 million of that is uninsured. We've obviously seen some Welsh Government grant funding. I think it's circa 235,000, maybe. I haven't got the figure in front of me, but from memory. I don't know whether the Cabinet member is able to say at this stage what sort of high-level themes they're discussing with Welsh Government in terms of trying to lever in additional money. But just in terms of safeguarding the capital programme next year and moving forward, how will he ensure that necessary recovery works don't displace other strategic investment priorities? Because we see in the papers there's a list of capital pressures that we need to get on top of as a county, right across the county. And finally, just in relation to schools, and I think I've asked this question a few times before, and I still haven't got sort of assurance in relation to the cost charging pressures the schools are placed from contractors who are on our commissioning framework, who are undertaking capital works and maintenance of the school estate. Are we thoroughly reviewing the charging regimes that some of these companies are putting forward? Because I know as a governor, I've seen some quotes that I believe to be excessive, and it's obviously adding that additional pressure on school budgets. I just want assurance that the council is actively monitoring these costs and taking steps to support schools, because I know head teachers are willing to go outside of the commissioning framework to save schools money, but it does expose them to additional risks. And you know, they're educators at the end of the day, professional educators. They're not project estates managers, you know, and it's a risk that they really don't need to shoulder. But I just want to ensure that as a council, we're monitoring these costs and we're reviewing those contractors that are on our framework on a regular basis. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pavia. Just to provide a little bit of the detail that's in the report on your question around Storm Claudia, the threshold that's reported in the report is that the council would need to meet the first £455,000 of the cost. So just a bit of context for that, just for anyone who might be looking. So starting with the passenger transport question, and Councillor Callard.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the question, Councillor Pavia. On the passenger transport unit, specifically regarding to home to school transport, you're absolutely right to say that we've seen an overspend there due to kind of unrealised savings from the realignment of the qualifying distances for free home to school transport. I think when we bought that policy, and we were very conscious that actually we made sure that routes remained safe, and we didn't remove free home to school transport where actually there was not any safe routes. And I think over the past 6 months, we've reviewed many of those routes. Some of the routes, we've agreed with the residents, with the parents, that they're not safe, and so we've put back in free home to school transport, which has resulted in this overspend. At the moment, we're not looking for any further savings within that directorate. Next year's budget, we're flatlining across from this year, so we're not looking to, I guess, reassess any further routes to remove free home to school transport from them. And in fact, as more information becomes available, we'll continue to review routes as parents will require it. It's really about striking that balance, I think, between getting the best value and operating in tight financial environment, while also making sure that our children can get to school safely. So there's no changes projected out into the next budget. On your next question, which was on schools contractor, is that right? Oh, Storm Claudia. Pete, do you want to come in on Storm Claudia?
Thanks, Councillor Callard, and first input for today's meeting. So Peter Davis, Deputy Chief Executive, Statutory Director for Resources, and the Council Section 151 Officer. To the question of Storm Claudia, I think probably just to reiterate and mirror comments that the leader, I think, has made in the chamber after, obviously, the impacts of Storm Claudia. We've been in ongoing and constructive dialogue with Welsh Government and continue to be in that same flow of discussion and communication. The Chair's rightly talked about the Emergency Financial Assistance Scheme, EFAS, and to the extent that we've breached the thresholds now, that has afforded us the ability above that threshold to be able to secure funding at the level of 85% from Welsh Government. The EFAS scheme only deals with the costs associated with the immediate response and the immediate recovery work. That doesn't extend itself, and I think to the question raised by Councillor Pavia, to I think the more significant infrastructure impacts that have been felt, the £9 million that was quoted, more so the £3.5 million uninsured. And that's the nature of the ongoing discussion and dialogue with Welsh Government. I had a call with senior local government finance officials last Friday about it. We supplied further information and detail into them yesterday evening. And I would certainly expect us to be looking to secure funding, certainly in the current financial year, to meet associated costs, I would hope, that we have incurred to progress those schemes of work to restore the impacted and affected infrastructure. The only innate difficulty that arises, don't want to make too many references to it today in the meeting, but we do have a Senate election coming in May. And clearly, given the extent and the nature of that flood recovery work, the lion's share of that work is going to be committed and undertaken, needing to be undertaken in 26, 27, if not beyond. So those will be discussions, dialogue that will need to be ongoing with the next Senate administration in order to, again, secure necessary funding to meet such costs, so that it doesn't fall upon, I guess, council taxpayers more locally. So that's the current state of play at the minute. I remain, positive, certainly in the in-years I've referred to, and we'll carry that conversation through naturally, into next year and beyond May. And that'll obviously be done through Councillor Callard with the leader, but clearly with senior leadership and officers as well. The broad, I think there was a degree of supplementary to your question, I think, which was around just sort of understanding as to what was the plan and what was the approach to deal with, I guess, some of those other unfunded pressures that are referred to within the report. I think there are a number of specific large schemes listed, which are not yet included in the budget. And clearly they will have to come forward on their own merits in terms of understanding the business case. And again, discourse and dialogue with Welsh Government, and to the extent that we can secure funding to at least meet, even if it's a share of said costs. So I think that's question 2. And Chair, if it's okay, I'll flow through into question 3, because that probably falls.
And just, if I may, just a quick question connected to what you've just described, Peter, which is really, really helpful. The Welsh Government support, which the report in front of us sets at a threshold above 455,000. If God willing, we have no more storms this financial year. If we had another one, is the threshold set for each event, or is it for the whole year, above which Monmouthshire incurs expenditure?
Yeah, it's the latter. So once the threshold is breached within a financial year, then it's all costs above. So if, and touching wood, and we hope that we don't, but if there was another significant event that required us to call upon EFAS, then we would have 85% of those costs met in full.
Thank you.
Chair, if I move that on to, I think, the final question of Councillor Pavia's, which was in relation to schools and procurement. I think we've had a couple of exchanges in this separately, Councillor Pavia. Well, certainly it's been fed into me. I'm aware of some specific cases that have referred on into property services and the head of landlord services to look over. Where I agree that on face value, some of those costs have appeared excessive for apparent minor capital works. But I think in the broader sense, I'm comforted by the very fact that obviously duty of care in terms of best value, but probably more so the fact that we are working closely with schools and probably worthwhile just also acknowledging the broader arrangement with procurement and with Ardle and the partnership with Cardiff. As Nikki, who's in the chamber with us, and will know and understand, we made it clear with Ardle when resetting the service level agreements with schools for this year that the support from Ardle extended right through and into schools. So we have chosen to look to extend that, and I think that's a very helpful strengthening of support and advice, both into schools directly, but equally in tandem with property services.
Thank you, Peter. Councillor Pavia, were you content with those responses? No follow-up. Okay, thank you. I'm going to now move on finally to Councillor Newell.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, colleagues in the chamber there. Most of my points actually have already been covered, so thanks for all the answers. For me, I just wanted to really understand the process when it comes to school budgets. We've got some schools at high risk, low risk and medium risk. Councillor Callard, you was kind enough to mention that some of the comprehensive schools have mentioned they're going to make incremental changes that hopefully over the 8 to 10 year period will bring them back into budget. I wondered if we're allowed to share what those incremental changes might be. Also, I was wondering if there's any examples as to why some schools are green and low risk and some are high risk, and what are certain schools do it differently to others, or what are there one-off events that are causing one school to spend more than the other? It's just, and finally, if I can, if the schools that are at high risk don't perform better financially, what happens to them then? What's after high risk? Do we step in with special powers? And again, it's just as a new councillor, just some explanation of the process. But thanks for all your hard work, everyone.
Thank you, Councillor Newell. I'm not sure how long we're going to let you get away with calling yourself a new councillor. I think that question remains to be answered. Who wants to pick up the question you raised, though, and the very valid points? I'm going to hand over to Will McLean.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Newell, for the question. So in terms of what actions the schools will take, so over a period of time, the schools will, and as Councillor Callard alluded to earlier, the majority of the school's costs are associated with staffing. So they will look at the staffing structures in the schools, the way in which classes are structured. They will look at the way in which teaching assistants are used to support certain classes, certain learners within those classes, and they will try and find the most appropriate way in which that can be managed. And it might be that there is some reduction in the staffing headcount in that period of time that allows them to make some savings. Beyond that, for secondary schools, they can look at their curriculum, they can consider the breadth and the depth of their curriculum, they can think about how that's delivered, the means in which it is, and all of those pieces will sit in their considerations, as will the staffing structure, the structure of their teaching and learning responsibility points, middle leader effectiveness. All of those things will be played into, and they will be making decisions reflecting the size of the school, the structure of the classes to reflect that, the numbers of teachers they require, the number of support staff they require. So that process will be dynamic and will happen every year. We obviously are able to provide projections of school pupil numbers for a certain distance into the future. That allows schools to think about what their shape might need to be. But those are the kind of things we'd be expecting our schools to look at. In terms of the impact and what's driven some of the overspends and what some of the differences are, that's really difficult to answer because all of our schools are different. Each of them operates within its own context. Some schools will have a very stable and resilient workforce. Others might be much more vulnerable to changes around illness and so on. Some schools are affected by very significant staff absence, which is caused by processes entirely away from the school. And that can have a really significant and material impact on a school itself. And so we've got to be conscious of those from time to time. In terms of what happens next, so we've been really clear with our schools around the importance of them creating realistic and achievable recovery plans, and that our expectation is that they adhere to them. That's a really sharp area of focus for both myself and Nikki Wellington, who leads our finance function. If a school was to be seen to be not able to meet its recovery plan, then there's a process by which the local authority can intervene in a school and exercise its powers. It's quite a protracted process. It would involve me as director writing to the school, being very clear around what my expectations were of the school's recovery process, and importantly at that stage, giving them time to evidence that they were capable of doing that. If at that future point, I did not have confidence that they were going to be able to meet a recovery plan, then we would have to move to a formal warning notice, which is issued under the School Standards and Organisation Act. And at that point, we can then access a range of powers. So we could remove the delegated budget from a school, and in doing so, the power to make those decisions about how a school might correct its deficit position comes back to the local authority. And the authority removes that budget from the school. So the point that Councillor Callard made earlier about it being the governing body who's making those decisions would no longer be the case, and it would be the local authority. So I hope that answers those three questions that I think Councillor Newell raised.
Councillor Newell.
Will, that was a brilliant answer, and thanks for that, and great explanation. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Newell. Just on that further response, Will, very helpful to understand how it works. One of the points that Councillor Newell was raising was what happens if we have one school that might be arguably performing better in managing its finances. Do you link schools together to try and help each other in better understanding and a better way of financial management?
Yeah, so it is something which we can do. It's one of those difficult things because schools have been seeking to make savings over time. Their own capacity to support other schools can sometimes have been affected by that. But certainly amongst our 4 secondary schools, we have had some really effective business managers, and they've been kind of working collectively to understand what they could do differently, and at times have provided support to other schools within those 4. So we have certainly tried to do that.
Thank you. And thank you, Councillor Newell. We have no more questions on this report, so I'm going to move the report, and I see no additional points, and we'll move on to item number 5, the report agenda item number 5, which is the draft revenue and capital budget for 26-27, and I think it's shown as 25-26 in the agenda, just a typo, but it's the 26-27 draft revenue and capital budget. So, Councillor Callard, did you want to introduce this report?
Thank you, Chair. If it's okay with the committee, I've got a presentation that just walks us through the budget for next year. It'll probably take me about 20 minutes to deliver. There'll be some things in there which will be very familiar to councils, but I think will probably be useful for the public watching. So if you just give me one moment, I will share my screen, and hopefully you'll see a presentation pop up. Let's see if I can get this to look how we want it to look. There we go. It's on the screen here. Can everybody see that? Yeah, great. Okay, I shall begin then. So, looking out towards the 2026-2027 budget, we use a couple of key documents in order to frame our budget planning. First and foremost, it's the Community and Corporate Plan, which sets really the principles and goals of the council during the administration. And then around that, we use the guide rails of the medium-term financial strategy and the medium-term financial plan, which we use to project over the medium term, which is the next 3 or 4 years, in terms of how we think the council is going to be positioned financially and the demand that we expect to see coming within that period. We also make sure that we prioritise our services to where we believe we'll get the greatest benefit and where there's most demand. The budget's split into 2 main areas. There's the revenue budget and the capital budget. The revenue budget is the day-to-day spending on services, covers most of the areas of spend that you would associate with the council in terms of waste collection, some of the highways work that we do, running the leisure centres, the schools. It's kind of paying people's wages day in, day out. On the capital side, it's investment in the services. So I like to think of it as buying things for the long term rather than just spending on the day-to-day of running the services. So bigger bits of highways infrastructure. We've seen, I guess, throughout the last decade in Monmouthshire, the biggest capital expenditure we've had is on the 3 new secondary schools, which have so far been delivered in Caldicot, Monmouth, and in Abergavenny. So, where do we get our money from as a council? The largest source of funding is from our core Welsh Government grant. It's projected to increase by 4.4%. Into 26-27, which will give us an extra £6 million to spend on our services. So that total pot of money will sum just shy of £145 million. Council tax is the second largest source of this council's income. We are proposing in our draft budget to increase it by 5.95%, which will give us a total income from council tax receipts of just shy of £85 million. And then lastly, and by far the smallest amount, is the income that we receive from fees and charges. These are such things as income through the leisure centres, planning fees, parking fees, and some discretionary waste services. And it's our proposal to increase those in line with inflation. So how do we decide where to spend our money? I briefly mentioned earlier about the community and corporate plan, but we look out via the medium-term financial strategy to make sure that we are planning our services in a sustainable way for the future. This committee will well know about the consistent pressure we've faced over the last few years within social care and health, which has had to change the way that the council operates. We also make sure that our choices are evidence-based by looking across our services, using data and analytics and feedback from our residents so we can understand people's priorities. And as we've just done for our 2025-2026 third update in the financial year, we are constantly reviewing the pressures on our services, our staffing needs, the demands that we face, alongside our ability to make efficiency savings where possible. And as this committee will well know, these plans change throughout the year to respond to the most recent information that we have. So when we build the budget, we make sure we conduct an impact assessment for our budget proposals so we can mitigate any potential negative effects of any proposals that we bring forwards, and also that we take into account residents and views, which is a really big priority, as I know it is for all councillors as well, to make sure that we're listening to our communities. And I know at the moment we're within the budget consultation period, but this is something that I know as councillors we do day in, day out, all year long. when we're talking to residents in our wards around the county about the services that they really value and about what matters to them. And we know that the services the council provides, schools, social care, waste, community services, our infrastructure, are all hugely valued by our residents. So when we come to prioritise the budget, the services within our budget, we always aim to protect the most vulnerable residents in our society, to address climate change, and to try and get the best value for money for our taxpayers. The proposals reflect what our residents say matters the most to them, and we'll always use public feedback to shape the final decisions that we make. Our total budget proposed for 2026-2027 is £230 million, which, as I mentioned, is 60% funded by our Welsh Government grant, and the remainder from council tax and fees and charges. And we split our spending across our directorates, and in a slide or two I'll show you a little bit more detail about how we do that. And one of the key messages for this budget, which I think has been a step change from previous years, is that we are not proposing any service reductions in any of our directorate areas. In fact, we're looking to do the opposite. It feels like for a very long period of time, the council has shrunk and had to rightly make savings in areas, but in other areas where we would rather not make savings. And I think, as I'm sure many of us who are in the chamber today drove here, roads being a particular area of concern. So in this year's budget, we are investing in our services for 26-27. So when we break down how the council spends the money it receives, about a third of it is between adults and children's social care. About another third of it is learning skills and economy, which to you and me is predominantly in our schools. We spend 3% of our budget on waste and environmental services. We spend 5% of our budget, so nearly £12 million on facilities and fleet, and about half of that is home to school transport, about £6 million. So when you add that into the education spend, you get north of £80 million once you factor in home to school transport. On our highways, on revenue spend, it represents about 2% of our budget, but when we come onto capital in a moment, you'll see that that highways forms the largest single part of our capital spend. And then there are other areas such as servicing the council's debt, the running of the council, and other levies, which make up significantly smaller percentages, but are equally as crucial into making sure that we can deliver our frontline services. So the capital budget is going to be about £19 million for 2026-2027. The biggest single area of spend, I think, as you'd expect, is in highways, infrastructure and transport. We know we've got some particular pressures around some key bits of infrastructure in our county, and we're also aware that with climate change, with the weather that we've been getting, I think it's been one of the wettest Januaries on record. The size and weight of cars is increasing. With more of a move to online shopping, we're getting a lot more light goods vehicles using our roads, making home deliveries, and all of this is adding up to the pressures, which I think we can really see on our road network at the moment in terms of the condition of some of those roads. It's really been compounding. Other areas where we spend a significant amount of our capital budget are on the maintenance of council land and the buildings which we operate, within our fleet, and a significant amount of that is within service reform. So that's where we're investing capital money within the authority, within our own services, in order that we can make changes to those services for long-term cost saving to increase the efficiencies of those services. So the next few slides go directorate by directorate through our services to talk about the proposals in the draft budget for 2026-2027. We'll start with our communities and predominantly our infrastructure. So it's our proposal to put an extra £5.5 million for road maintenance, footways, bridges and public rights of way. And in addition to that, just shy of £5 million over 2 years, so about £2.5 million a year on the refurbishment of the Chain Bridge, which many of you know will have been down to one lane with traffic lights for an extended period of time. But this work will enable Chain Bridge to reopen to 2 lanes of traffic, and also an additional £1.69 million for essential road resurfacing and structural repairs. We're also intending to invest in an additional gully cleaning team, something that I heard through the debate which we had following Storm Claudia back in December, when we were reflecting on the impact that had on, specifically the community of Monmouth, was a real desire for the council to spend more on making sure drains are clear and making sure our streets are cleaner, reduce surface water. So we are proposing to invest more money in a gully cleaning team and an additional street sweeping team, which will increase the capacity in those areas. And I know that was a particular call that we heard from councillors during that meeting. We're also looking to improve our public rights of way with new signage, better drainage and improvements to the bridges that we've seen. Some of the bridges on our public rights of way are becoming not so safe to use, and so they need to be replaced. And also making sure that we have got the facilities in place to plan for severe weather, to increase our resilience and protect our infrastructure into the future. We know that we're going to see more and more cases of extreme weather, and that really puts a lot of demand, not only where we think it on the day-to-day council services, but teachers getting to schools, people being able to get to work, people being able to travel around the county. And we've just seen just recently in Llantoni what that can look like when half of the road has nearly slipped away down the mountain and is causing significant hardship for that community. So across our care services, we are proposing to increase the money that goes into care with an additional £1 million investment, which will go to meet the growing and complex demand that we're seeing in adults and children's social care. As this committee well knows, that's been a significant area of pressure over the previous years. And in fact, this year has felt to me like a little bit of a turning point, where in previous years we've seen, continued pressure, continued overspend within that directorate. We touched on it in the last report, but this year, the chair was right to mention that, a lot of it has been resolved through increased funding from external sources, but it feels like I hope, have seen kind of the crest of that wave in terms of increasing costs. And also, we're proposing to increase some funding for specialist care for people needing long-term specialist care. We're going to keep investing in our family support services. Some national grants are reducing, and this is a slightly recurring theme in this budget, is that where grants from central government which go to support specific services, where those grants are reducing, we are proposing within this draft budget to step in and actually continue to fund those services. Often these are services which look to identify, catch problems early and actually reduce long-term costs associated with some of these needs if they go unmet. And we're also proposing to invest in better record-keeping systems for social care. It will improve our data protection, our safety, and should enable our services to be delivered in a more efficient way. A theme of the last few years within social care has been the reablement program, which we've been implementing in order that we can help people recover better from illness and really I suppose, keep people within their communities, near their families, I guess out of long-term residential care for as long as possible. It means that they often have a better quality of life, but also places less of a financial burden on the local authority with their care. So we're going to continue that programme. And we're also going to continue to invest in our in-house children's services. Council will be aware that the Cabinet has taken a number of decisions over the past years where we've purchased properties suitable for housing looked after children. That programme will continue. It's beneficial for those receiving care because they get to stay within their communities. They can often get good care. They'll be around people that they're familiar with, within their neighbourhoods. But also it avoids the council placing children in costly out-of-county placements. And within adult social care, we've had some long-term vacant posts. So it's our intention not to fill those vacant posts for the time being. And I know Councillor Pavia and I have had a debate in the past about what constitutes a vacant post and how long does a post need to be held vacant before it's formalised within the service. I think that's a really good question. But for the purposes of this budget, the main message is that there will be no reduction in our care force going from 25-26 to 26-27. So within children and young people, we know from the last report that we've got pressure within our schools' budgets. Last year, on top of pay and pensions pressure, this council delivered an additional £1 million to our schools. It's our proposal to do the same again this year. So on top of pay and pension pressures, to allocate an additional £1 million to our schools. It's about an extra £96 per pupil, which is about £20,000 for a 210, and depending on the size of comprehensive school, it's between £70,000 and £120,000 in that sort of ballpark. We're also going to continue investing in our specialist resource bases to support children who've got complex needs, and that should help children to stay in their local schools with the personalised support. And again, that's one of those service area which offsets a longer term cost. We're also looking to recruit a Welsh language officer to support our goal of delivering 10% of the curriculum in Welsh by 2030. And we know that we've got a growing Welsh medium education provision within the county. Ysgol Gymraeg y Fenni is about to move to two-form entry, and Ysgol Gymraeg Tryfynwy in Monmouth continues to go from strength to strength. I mentioned earlier about some grant funding being ended and us proposing to pick up the cost of providing those services. The Inspire programme is one of those. The grant funding is ending. It's a really, really important programme which targets young people who are not in education, employment or training. NEETs, I think, is a term that's been used. And it's one of those stages in people's lives where intervention can be really, really crucial. In those people who may be at risk of not getting a job, not getting any education, it can have such a big impact on the rest of their lives. So it's a program that the administration would like to continue to fund, and so we've put it into our draft budget proposals. So our residence services, a few years ago, there was a reduction in our library's budget, specifically around book buying. We've heard from many of our library users that if a new book comes out, many people want to read it, that actually we don't have enough copies to go round. So it's our proposal to increase the book buying budget to our libraries so that they can continue to purchase the correct number of new books, so that the people who want to borrow those books can continue to do so, which is going to support our goals of increasing access to learning and community resources. We're also proposing to increase the funding for Citizens Advice in Monmouthshire. It's been fixed in cash terms for many years now. I know many councillors would also be members of town and community councils, and I know our town and community councils across Monmouthshire provide a great deal of support to Citizens Advice. Monmouthshire County Council does the same, and this year we're proposing increasing that to try and, I guess, what has effectively been a cut in the funding in real terms over the years, because again, we know the work that Citizens Advice do with debt advice, supporting residents, managing their finances is so important and can often reduce costs and the longer term burden on people. It's really an investor save. On homelessness, we are going to use some of the additional council tax income we've received from our second and empty homes council tax premium to reinvest into homelessness to improve our temporary accommodation and prioritise support and affordable housing. We've seen actually in homelessness, I think it's been a real area of success over the last few years, whereby we've managed to really reduce the number of people in bed and breakfast accommodation. Some of those premises around Monmouthshire are now actually really thriving hospitality businesses, where previously they were they were being used to support those at risk of homelessness. And so it's really been a double win, not only for the local economy, but for those people who are at risk of homelessness. So our waste and recycling centres, we're not proposing any changes to those into the next financial year. I know many local authorities have gone to 3 weekly black bag collections. We are not proposing that. We are keeping our collections the same, so we won't have any reductions in that. And the community hubs, leisure centres, museums, we will be protecting the opening times of those services, so they will continue to be open for our residents and indeed for those visiting the county. And we're also going to look at ways in which we can improve the front door of the council. I know many councillors will probably be aligned with me sometimes with the frustration about the front door can seem a bit clunky, especially online for some of the council services. I think our residents would really appreciate it if that front door was a little easier to open, a little easier to access the services that we need. So we're looking to invest and improve that side of the council as well. So we're currently in the middle of the budget consultation period. We've done a number of events, both online and in person, for the public, for the schools, for different service users. That's going to continue until the middle of next week, at which time the Cabinet will take away the feedback that we've received from that consultation and develop that into the final budget proposals, which will go before Cabinet on the 4th of March and then before Council on the 5th of March. And that's the end of this presentation, Chair. So you've probably heard enough from me, so I'll stop sharing and I'm happy to go to questions.
Thank you, Councillor Callard. That's very informative, very thorough. So I'll open to questions from colleagues. Who would like to go first? I think you've talked them into silence for a moment. Have we any members of the performance and overview? Yes, see Councillor Hath, if you could wait until we've had the members of the Performance and Overview Committee questions, first of all, please. So Councillor Buckler.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Callard. I presume that presentation that you've just given us has been the one that you've been taking around, and you're at the sort of the roadshow of consultations around the Monmouthshire when you've been talking to residents. So very user friendly. Now we know that with the proposed 5.95 increase in council tax that that you are proposing that our residents pay, that in real terms, in the last few years, council tax rise is going to go up by over 30%, which is an enormous increase when you think of it for residents. In fact, it's nearer 35%, 34.5, I think, would be about right. Now, is it just a convenient way of stretching our residents to beyond breaking point to ask them yet again to have this, big increase? Now, you quite rightly say that you want to keep the services that we do, but we've been discussing in our previous report about the ongoing pressures of our current budget, how difficult it is to maintain services as they are, and in light of the proposed changes to the Welsh Government as well, we are in a very sort of perilous position. But is it reasonable that we ask our residents to take the burden of this? And, are we doing enough efficiency and spend control? And, are we getting the prioritization right between the services versus the tax burden to our residents? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buckler. And Councillor Callum, did you want to address those?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the question, Councillor Buckler. I mean, your contention, is it easy to put up council tax? Is that the easy answer? It absolutely is not the easy answer. In fact, I would say there are no easy choices when it comes to setting a council budget. It's very, very challenging. And I know members of this committee, are particularly aware about where this council spends its money and how it spends its money. The choice that we have as a council is that we can pay less tax and have fewer public services, have a lower level of public services, or we can pay a potentially higher level of tax and have better public services. The statement you meant about in terms of it being easy with regards to should we be looking for savings within our services? Within this budget, we're delivering £2 million, I think just over £2 million of savings within our services, service efficiencies. We spoke in our last report how in the last 12 months we've delivered just over £9 million of savings. And when actually you look back over the years, we've delivered tens upon tens, even before this administration, tens and tens of millions pounds worth of savings. When I speak to people out and about, and especially at the moment with the bad weather that we've been having, the effect that that's had on our infrastructure, I hear that people want their council to do more, that they want their services to be better. When you talk with people about their experiences of using our care services, they really, really value these services. They look after the most vulnerable in our society. We've just been talking about our schools as well and their performance, and we've got a lot of really, really great schools in Monmouthshire. Our recent Estin inspection has confirmed that. Do we want to cut funding to our schools? I don't want to cut funding to our schools. I really believe in the services. I believe in looking after young people. So when we look through our budget and we talk about easy choices, there aren't any easy choices. If we want to have great public services, we need to pay for them. And I say we, all of us as councillors here in Monmouthshire, we pay council tax like our residents do. It has seemed over the past few years that the increase in council tax, the cumulative increase in council tax, we get to some, as you mentioned, some quite big numbers. We've gone through a period of very high inflation caused by, coming off the back of the COVID pandemic, by war in Ukraine. Over the same period of time, I think the national minimum wage has increased by about 34%, pensions by just under 30%. In fact, I would say those who have been squeezed the most over the past, 5 years, off the back of COVID, has probably been those, earning a wage as their primary source of income. That wages have struggled to keep up. So it really comes down to the question of what sort of council do we want to be. And even when we look out, actually, some news today, we know, Reform took over a load of councils in England at the last local elections on the promise of low council tax or lower levels of council tax. They've gone out today in Worcester with a proposed council tax increase of 9%. So, I don't try and dress it up to say that increasing council tax is easy. It's not. It's difficult. It's difficult for those residents who are squeezed. It's difficult for those who are experiencing pressures in the cost of living. But the alternative and what that means for the most vulnerable in our society, what that means for the services we provide, I think is worse. And so when we look at making these tough choices, we reluctantly look to increase council tax to bridge that gap so we can protect our services and protect the residents that rely on them.
Councillor Buckler, did you want to come back on that or add anything?
Well, just to say, really, very robust defence, Councillor Callard, of your reasoning for this proposed budget. It's our duty to hold this budget to magnifying glass, and our residents would expect nothing less. So they'll be very interested to hear what you say. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Callard, you mentioned the choice, apparently, of the higher levels of council tax or cuts. And I think one of the things that we've heard from the senior finance team, and I believe from yourself, or your predecessor in the last 3 years, which is that the council needs transformation in order to manage its way through the medium-term financial challenges. And therefore, residents might say it's an entirely false dichotomy to present that you either have high council tax increases or you have cuts, when the option is to organise the way that we deliver services differently. And many residents may well say, well, that's what we do in our businesses. We can't simply add up our costs and say, well, we're just going to chuck another 6% on this year and 8% last year. They have to do that. They have to work within the firm discipline of managing within their costs. So how would you respond to a resident who would make those points? And I think a great many would.
Thanks, Chair. I feel like I addressed that slightly in my answer, in that the council has been transforming how it delivers its services. I mean, it's had to. If it didn't, it wouldn't be here. I mentioned in the last 12 months, this council's delivered over £9 million worth of savings. I want to say over the last decade, we're talking more than £50 million worth of savings within our services. That has been brought about through the transformation of how this council delivers its services. We're going to continue to do that. We talked earlier about how we've been investing in homes for our looked after children so they can be supported within their communities. Not only is it better for those receiving those care services, but it's a cost save to local authority. We've been doing the same with how we deliver social care with the reablement strategy and keeping those people as healthy as people can be kept for as long as possible. We've got an ageing demographic in Monmouthshire. We need to make sure that when we are providing the services that we are providing, care packages are right-sized, that we're targeting the right people in the right ways, in order that we can get the best value for money. My entire experience before becoming a councillor has been in the private sector, in workplaces. So I'm well aware of the challenges of balancing budgets in a commercial environment. Quite honestly, the way councils operate, I struggle to make the comparison, because many businesses faced with the services that council are legally obliged to provide would simply leave the marketplace because of the challenges. We're here to provide public services. And I think that what we're proposing here in this budget is a very prudent way forward in balancing the demands that we have on our services with target investment into our services, which we know our residents are really looking for, alongside measured efficiency. So I think, that we are striking the right balance with this. And just to loop it back to your original point, the savings that have been made within this council over the past 10, 15 years by this administration, by the administration prior to this administration, really evidence that this council has changed significantly over that period of time.
Thank you, Councillor Callaghan. I absolutely agree with you that it must be very puzzling for residents to follow the logic in how councils present their finances. On the one hand, you're referencing £9 million of savings, but we're seeing an extra 13 million, or just shy of 13 million pounds, being spent in the coming year. So I think residents really struggle to understand how it can be that we do those things and yet charge more. But I think the question of being able to simply explain to our residents, all of us, that there is justification for increases in the last 5 years, which are 10 percentage points above in UK inflation rates. You would answer that question how?
It's a really good question, and it's one of the the challenges of a taxation system based on council tax, whereby it is it's not a percentage of anything. It is a fixed amount of money which increases in year. I guess a classic way to try and articulate that is that every year people, public sector, private sector, get a pay rise. We know it's one of the biggest cost areas of this council is paying the wages of the people that we rely on to deliver the public services. So every year, the council needs to find more money to pay for the increases of pay of our public services, just like they do in the private sector, to keep up with inflation. And not only do we have that, that issue where council tax being a fixed cash sum obviously needs to increase. Council income tax being a percentage of income. And we know that thresholds have been fixed for a very long time with income tax, but because it's a percentage, as your pay increases, the amount of tax you pay increases. But you don't think about it because the percentage stays the same. Well, we know that council tax doesn't work like that. And so because it's fixed in cash rather than a percentage, that needs to increase year on year to not only catch the increase in the cost of all of the staff that provide our services, but year on year, we are providing services to more and more people with more and more complex needs, our aging population, the challenges within our schools, with the additional support that some of our pupils need. This is a case of, the additional income that we receive, both from Welsh Government and from council tax, going directly into the services that people use. There's some big numbers, but the services that we provide are broad, and they, my own view of this, and I know, I didn't have a particularly good understanding of this before I became a councillor and before I took on this role within the council. But it's my firm belief that this council does deliver value for money for its residents and will continue to do so, and this budget supports that delivering of value for money. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Callaghan. And just looking at the hands up, I see Councillor Howells.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Ben. Thanks for the presentation. My question is obviously on the highways, potholes. Obviously, it's a bugbear for all us councillors and residents, obviously, at this time of year. Does this budget ensure we are able to address all the potholes in the next year at speed? I bring to point that I reported a pothole on Friday, and I saw it was repaired already when I drove over it this morning. So I was impressed by the speed of that. Whether a resident had reported it beforehand, but it obviously is a concern for residents. I'd be interested to know Is there sufficient capacity for speedy repairs of potholes?
Could you possibly report a few of my potholes? That's remarkable.
It is, isn't it?
In terms of speed.
For the chair's award, I am going to bring up the Chain Bridge. As close to £5 million being spent on that. Are we looking for assistance from Welsh Government? I know we have in the past, but are we continuing to ask for assistance? Because that's quite a large sum. And on to a final question is schools and ALN. So does the £1 million over inflation fully cover the 2026-27 pay awards and the ALN pressures? And just for clarity, does the allocation work out at, as it's in the report, £96 pounds per child per school? So it's dependent on how many children in the school, regardless of if it's a primary school or comprehensive school, secondary school. Thanks.
Thank you for the questions, Councillor Howells. On the first topic, potholes, will they all be fixed? We obviously investing in this budget, significant more money in order to repair potholes, specifically at this time of year, and especially with the weather that we've been having. They are really bad at the minute. I'm pleased to see that you've managed to at least have some potholes patched very quickly with the council. And, on that, I would encourage councillors, residents, just to report. You see a pothole, take a photo, report it. The more data that the authority can get about, a particular issue, especially if it's dangerous, because it may be that a council operative won't see it for a longer period of time. It's really helpful in us getting those temporary repairs in place quickly. Will all of the potholes be fixed over the next year? I wish that was the case, Councillor Howells, but the backlog of our road maintenance, and I would include things like our bridges here as well, in terms of some of the structures that we've got. I think the last update I had on the total backlog, it was north of £60 million. So you can really see the scale of the challenge there. And, we're not alone in Monmouthshire. The challenge is very similar all across the UK, where we've just not had the investment in our infrastructure over an extended period of time. And it's almost like, if you don't pay £100 today, tomorrow you've got to pay the £100 for tomorrow and the £100 for today. So this stuff just compounds and compounds over the years. And we find ourselves in a situation like this where we are fighting so hard to get our roads back into an acceptable condition, but we do have significant headwinds. You also made an interesting observation there about not only do we have the money to fix all the roads, but do we have the capacity? And I would say that's also a structural issue, as in not physical structure, whereby because over this period of time, maintenance on highways nationally has been at a certain level, to get it to be at a higher level means that we need more capacity in the world of highways contractors, more capacity in the design teams and people who specify this work. So that capacity, even if we turned on an even bigger amount of money overnight, that capacity can't be activated overnight. So what we really need is like a longer term, structural plan, I would say on a nationwide basis, in order to address some of this, whereby that we can increase the skills within our contractor workforce, increase the capacity of those contractors, increase our internal capacity in order to deliver more quickly. So it continues to be a really challenging environment to work in. It's something that everyone is talking about all the time right now because of the weather, because of that extended period of time. We all feel it. Our roads feel particularly bad at the moment, because we know how much it means to everybody. It's really a priority for us, but unfortunately we just don't have the resources in order to make all of our roads as I think they should be, as I think we should expect being the fifth richest economy in the world, something like that. Onto the chain bridge, you mentioned about.
Just before we do, just for clarity on this, because we could spend an awful lot of time on potholes, and I'm sure we won't do that here. But there is a question that comes up again and again and again, that the way in which we generally fill potholes tends to be very short term. We don't cut the pothole cleanly, line it with tar, then damp it down with fresh tar and chippings. We tend to throw the loose tar into the hole, and it lies in a profile to the road. And of course, with freezing weather and with water, it can very often be worn away within days. So I think one of the things that we hear a great deal from within the community and across councillors is that seems like very short-term, pointless expenditure, when actually doing the job properly might take longer, but it would last a great deal longer. Just what's your view on that?
That's a really good question, Chair. Often the reason that the temporary patching is done is where we have a dangerous situation. So something needs to happen very quickly in response to a particularly deep, dangerous, sharp pothole in order to avoid a risk to the public. So in those cases, we prioritise making the situation safe as quickly as possible. I would say that you're right in that uses up resources. Could those resources be deployed in more thorough resurfacing, which is really what needs to happen in many of these roads? It would be great if we could not do cold fill and resurface the roads, but what we'd actually find is many of our roads being more dangerous for an extended period of time while we caught up with that work. It is temporary in nature. It is frustrating, but it is a response to immediate safety concerns within that infrastructure. It's a very challenging environment. I completely agree with you that sometimes it feels like painting the fourth bridge, because as soon as you fill a pothole, you have some bad weather, and 2-3 days later, the material that you put into the road has come out again. Our teams on the roads, they work incredibly hard. I think they fill about 80 potholes a day around the county. I'm getting nods from Deb. They work hard, often at this time of year, in bad light, in the pouring rain, in the freezing weather, in order to try and keep our roads in a safe way. It can seem counterintuitive at times, but what it does is it just buys us a little bit more time so we can schedule that more intensive work in terms of the actual resurfacing that needs to take place. Does that explain it, Chair?
It explains it. We'd probably have a slightly different view of it, but it certainly answers the question. Thank you. Councillor Howes, sorry, I interrupted your flow of questions. The next one was about the chain bridge and I think external funding.
Sorry. So the chain bridge, I mentioned that over the next 2 years, £5 million will be allocated, just shy of £5 million, to repair that bridge. 50% of that is funded by Welsh Government. I'm sure you'll be aware that there's been, some extended negotiations about trying to get some external funding for that project, so we're really, really pleased to receive that. And on your last question about schools funding, there is the pay and pension cost of teachers, which will go up next year. That's fully funded, and the £1 million is additional to that. That £96 per pupil just relates to the additional £1 million. So in fact, the quantum of the additional funding to schools will be higher than that. And it's going to be allocated on according to the current formula by which money is allocated to our schools. So there won't be a change in the way that money is allocated. I think that's right. Do you want to add anything to that, Will?
I think, sorry, Councillor Clark, just one piece, which was around the ALN. So some of the ALN additional lines will also flow through to schools. So we're increasing the IDP funding pot. So where schools have IDPs, that money will flow to them. So it's increasing in a whole range of those identified budget lines.
Just a question on the comment about it being fully funded, Councillor Callard. This year in the report we've just looked at, the national insurance shortfall in funding is close to £750,000. So is that also the same situation in the year ahead?
Thank you, Chair. So, yeah, you're quite right that in year we've had to manage that as a pressure, and we've also taken that into next year's workings as well. But just to be clear, all of our services, including schools, will be given full allowance for any national insurance costs that they will be incurring next year.
Thank you. So that's really helpful clarification. So there will not be a shortfall on national insurance next year. Is that right?
It's a shortfall that we're having to manage as an authority, but those services will not see.
No, it's the same situation really as this year. It's just that there is a shortfall in the funding made up by the council.
Absolutely.
Compensated by the council. Thank you. Councillor Howes, was there any follow-up you wanted to
thank you.
ask?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, everyone.
Great. So we're moving on to Councillor McConnell.
Thank you, Chair. Change of subject. This in the earlier section of this meeting, we talked about Storm Claudia and the recouping of some of the money and how that had reached a ceiling. And there was a moment we all crossed our fingers that we didn't have another extreme weather event before the end of the financial year. It's not unlikely that we would have at least one extreme weather event next year. And I'm just wondering, so my question is, do we have resilience, financial resilience against that eventuality? I'd be taking out insurance, except it's probably not insurable. So it's that question of resilience and whether that's built into the budget. Thank you.
And I guess, related to that, Councillor McConnell, is that we have to spend the money before we can look to reclaim it. So there's that not insignificant aspect to it before we can claim 85% of anything above the 455. Thank you. Councillor Callard, did you want to?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thank you, Councillor McConnell, for the question. In the 2025-2026 budget, which was last year, we put in place a contingency fund of, I think it was £850,000 at the time. We are proposing to do the same for the next financial year. So, in essence, I suppose you could treat it like an easy access reserve in terms of having that funding available and ready and earmarked to respond to any events that may occur, which has been very helpful. So far within 2025-2026, we've managed. We made a draw on that earlier in the year, but that draw has since been replenished, so that fund is still intact. Where we have assets which are insurable, they are insured. But as we mentioned and we talked about earlier, specifically around highways assets, they are uninsurable. So we always carry risk there. Peter Davis talked about working with Welsh Government now to actually try and get some support to handle some of these losses, which is mainly around the highways infrastructure, which can be damaged during extreme weather events.
Thank you. Looking at hands up, I see Councillor Buckler. I know you said in the chat that you just had a really quick question. You've already had some questions, but is it a really quick one that you just wanted to come in before I pick up any member who's not a member of the committee?
Yes, I promise it's quick. It's actually, you referenced it, Councillor Callard, about Lantoni. The reason I'm sitting here trapped is because of that landslip. Now, it's very evident that at Lantoni, there has been no stitch and time work done. There has been no maintenance of overgrown trees. And the reason that the landslip has happened is that overgrown trees have got waterlogged, fallen down and pushed the road with them. And we've actually just had another landslip very close by this morning for exactly that reason. So it's costing us more to put barriers up, to investigate, to get these solutions, when we should be considering how we deal with our road network much more proactively than reactively. So that was the point I wanted to make.
Thank you, Councillor Buckler. It sounds more like a point than particularly a question, but if there's anything that colleagues want to come back.
Yeah, Thanks, Chair. I'd just say, Councillor Buckler, I've been trying to stay in touch with the situation in Llanthony. I know it's hugely distressing for a number of residents there. One of the issues that we face across Monmouthshire and with regards to our highways, which is compounded by how rural we are as a county, is that often we have impacts on our infrastructure from the land adjoining it. So, we have runoff from roads. We have runoff from fields where they're not drained properly onto our roads, and our road infrastructure ends up with dealing that. And similarly, in some areas where we have issues with the land adjoining council assets, things that happen to that land, whether it be maintenance of trees or whatever it may be, can have an impact on the council's assets. And we try very hard, and the Debs team try very hard to work with the landowners around our assets in order to make sure that we're all working together to make sure that that we're doing the best that we can to keep our infrastructure in good condition. It's particularly challenging with the rurality, with some of our roads, especially with those on steep-sided hillsides where landslips can and do occur, and it's especially consequential in Llanthony because the only other road out is a significantly longer route. It's also not a very it's a very narrow, windy road that goes over the top of a mountain. You know better than I do, Councillor Buckler. I'm trying to stay abreast of the issues in Llanthony, and our thoughts go out to those. And I know we've got a number of officers working very hard and very closely with local residents in order to try and do what we can to mitigate the impacts of that landslip.
Thank you, Councillor Callard, and I'm sure we're all passing on our best wishes, Councillor Buckler, in the very challenging situation of dealing with that landslip. Hope you're okay. I see last hand up is from Councillor Jones. We welcome you, Councillor Penny Jones, from another committee to our joint committee. Do you have
Yes, thank you, Chair, for allowing us to attend today. And thank you, Ben, for the report and the presentation. Mine's a quick question, really. It relates to the fees and charges, which affect, of course, as you said, planning and car parking, leisure centres, etc. And the fact that there's going to be a 3.8% rise in fees. And I just wondered whether this was across the board, whether this affected every area, or was it just in some areas? So please, can I have some clarity on that? Because, of course, this affects all residents. Thank you.
Yes, who wants to pick up? Councillor Callard?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question, Councillor Jones. Many of the fees and charges we charge, you mentioned they affect all residents. They affect those residents which use the services for which fees and charges are payable. So if one doesn't use a car park or whatever, that maybe then there's no fees or charges to pay. But they are across the board 3.8%. So it's quite a simple change just to uprate it with the inflation rate as it was when we were drawing the budget up.
Thank you very much. And finally, Councillor Bryn, welcome.
Diolch, Chair, and thank you for letting me speak today. I'm sorry to take us back to this, but I'm just seeking a little bit of clarity, if that's okay, Councillor Callard. With regard to the extra 5.5 million for highways, I just wanted to ask, is it proposed for any of that funding to go to be put towards new machinery or technology to allow for an increase in hot potholing and towards the training of staff, which you did mention earlier was needed? And can you tell me if a proportion of that funding will be ring fenced for footway and rights of way, is it within that list? But I do feel that unless there's a proportion of it ring fenced for that purpose, that it might all get swallowed up by potholes, considering there's a 60 million deficit in that area particularly. So if you could have a bit of clarity for that would be great. Diolch.
I'll answer this question. I'm Deborah Howells. I'm the Chief Officer for Infrastructure. I'm pleased to say that we've got £500,000 allocated to undertaking maintenance on our footpaths, We're currently putting that scheme together, a planned maintenance, and we'll be sharing that as and when we've fully developed that. In terms of the funding that's available, at this moment in time, it's not earmarked to the purchase of technology. It is all earmarked to actually maintaining our bridges, undertaking improvements or repairs to those bridges, as well as undertaking resurfacing of our existing carriageways.
Thank you, Deborah, and thank you for the question, Emma. That's very helpful. I see no more hands, so I'm going to call an end to this session on this report and move the report that's in front of us, which is the draft revenue and capital budget proposals, in item 5 on the agenda. And we will now move on to the item 6, which is, I should say thank you to everyone who's been asking the questions, but also the responses and the time taken. Moving on to item 6, which is the Council and Cabinet Work Planner, which is just for information and for you to have a look at. And please do, if you wanted to raise any issues there. The same is true for item 7, the Performance and Overview Work Planner and Action Lists. And is there anything on the action list that, Robert, you wanted to draw out?
Nothing especially, Chair. So if the members don't have any comments, we're working on those that we don't yet have an answer to, and then on some, as written, there have been some answers and responses sent to members for things.
Perfect. Thank you. So we will move on to confirm the minutes at item 8 on the agenda, the minutes of the previous meetings, which are on the 18th of November, the 3rd of December, and the 27th. So we had 2 specials. Most recently, just 10 days or so ago. So I move those minutes. I see no changes or corrections. Thank you. And just to notify us and remind us of the next meeting on the 10th of March, which will be, we'll be homing in on Easter by that stage. And gosh, can you imagine it? It only seems like a day or two ago it was Christmas, but here we are well into February. And let's hope the weather improves by then as well. So thank you in the meantime. Thanks for everyone's involvement in the meeting today.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chair. Bye.